June 1941, a few hours before dawn. The North Atlantic is a frost-breathed plain, and the convoy zigzags like a nervous animal. Somewhere out there, a wolf pack crouches under the swells, diesel-hot and eager. A U-boat commander has made his estimates, slid his pencil along a chart, and licked his thumb to turn a page in the signal book. The Admiralty in Paris sent him a confident vector hours ago, codenamed and enciphered, pointing to fat targets at a certain square on a certain grid in a certain night. He rises, trusts the mathematics he believes belongs to him, raises a periscope, and sees nothing where food should be. The convoy is somewhere else. A quick correction becomes a longer chase. A longer chase becomes a report he hates writing. The surprise he was promised keeps dying in the radio. What moved the ships was not luck. It was a set of ideas about permutations, habits, and the brute predictability of human beings in uniforms. The ideas wore a Polish name before they wore British machines, and before bomber ever meant a roomful of drums spinning toward an answer. A 20-something mathematician in Warsaw taught a small office how to turn card tricks into convoys saved. Secrets die when patterns live. This is the story of how Marian Rejewski taught a war to fear paper. Before we dive in, hit subscribe for more untold stories, the ones the history books buried beneath headlines, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now back to the signal traffic. Start with a simple question. How did a country that would be occupied first teach its allies how to unoccupy a cipher? The answer doesn't start with Bletchley Park. It begins in Poznan. In 1929, the Polish General Staff, Biuro Szefrów, opened an unusual course for university students. The course was not for soldiers, it was for minds. A young man named Marian Rejewski, not yet the kind of person who gets statues, walked in with an affection for algebra and a habit of listening when the world talked in symbols. The machine he would break was born from a salesman's hunger. Before the war, Enigma was a commercial product, an electromechanical box for banks and businessmen, with a keyboard like a typewriter, a lampboard that lit up letters, and a set of stepping rotors that made an alphabet into a maze. By the time the German army put uniforms on it, Enigma had grown a reflector so that letters always paired, a plugboard at the front, to scramble the first contact with 26, and procedures wrapped around it like a blanket. The Germans believed in this blanket the way a child believes in a locked door. They had reasons. Enigma's key space, if you counted rotors, ring settings and plugboard, stretches into an absurdity of combinations, the kind of number that makes a lieutenant colonel laugh. They also had one bad reason. They were certain their habits were not part of the math. In 1931, in a Paris café, a French spymaster received a packet from a German source with a plain cover name, Haché. Inside were documents on the military Enigma, operator manuals, keys, procedures, a thing you cannot derive with algebra alone. The French, with admirable clarity of mind, forwarded copies to the Poles. The British saw them too, but lacked one essential ingredient at that moment, the willingness to let mathematicians lead the dance. Poland had that. In 1932, the Biuro Szefrów hired 3 young men, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rodziski, and Henryk Zygalski, and did something radical by the standards of the day. It gave the problem to mathematicians first. Rejewski's training gave him the one trick Enigma respects, a way to think about wiring as permutations. Imagine the keyboard as 26 letters. Imagine the rotors as 3 people in a row who take whatever you hand them and exchange it for something else. Imagine the reflector as the last person in line who shoves your gift back as a return. Each key press is a composition of permutations. Plugboard, rotor, rotor, reflector, back through rotors, back through plugboard. Because the reflector guarantees that a signal goes out and returns along a path. Enigma has a quirk. No letter is ever enciphered as itself. This seems like a small thing. It will matter later as a lever. The Germans added a daily key so that every machine on that day started with the same rotor order, ring settings and plugboard. They also added a convenience for operators, a habit disguised as a procedure. To begin a message, set the rotors to the day's Grundstellung, type a 3-letter message key you invent, read the 3 enciphered letters that light, then type your message key again so the receiving operator can repair any errors. Double encipher the indicator and you protect the message key. In practice, the double encipherment was not protection, it was a fingerprint on the glass. That doubled indicator, repeated and deterministic under the same starting conditions, let Rejewski treat the scrambled pairs as a single permutation on the alphabet. Write down the 26 two-letter pairs that result from first and fourth letters, second and fifth, third and sixth, for many messages that share the same daily ground setting. Follow the pairs. They fall into cycles, like a necklace where you can start at any bead and come back to the start after some number of steps. The lengths of these cycles, how many hops before the necklace closes, don't care about the plugboard. That was the genius. The plugboard was a front porch. The cycles lived in the house. If you catalogue the cycle structure for each possible rotor order and ring setting, you had a lookup you could consult without worrying about the plugboard. In 1934-1935, Rejewski invented a new device to do exactly this, the cyclometer. Picture two Enigma rotor stacks wired to each other, so that when you put the same settings on both and let the signal play between them, you see the cycle structure that double-enciphered indicators would produce. Then you write those cycle structures down. Then you do it again and again until the catalogue is big enough to be useful. Useful here is an immodest word. The catalogue would ultimately contain the cycle characteristics for all rotor orders the Germans then used. Hundreds of thousands of entries. It was the kind of clerical mountain that ends empires if nobody climbs it. Poland climbed it with paper, pencil, and a patient kind of fury. What did that buy? On a real day, a sergeant at a listening post could collect a handful of indicators, pass them to the bureau, and in hours the card drawers would identify the rotor order and ring settings for that day. Then the team could solve the plugboard and open the day's traffic. No bomb, no racks of machines, a card index and the assumption that German habits would stay German. This was a card trick in the truest sense. It looked like a conjurer's patter, something too simple to embarrass a Reich. It was not simple, it was a routine built on a weakness the machine inherited from its procedures, and on algebra good enough to ignore the front-of-house confusion the plugboard tried to impose. The cards worked until the day the procedure changed. Before that day, the polls went further. If the plugboard could not be ignored, if the Germans added more leads and became less lazy at the front panel, Rejewski and his colleagues still had tools. One came on sheets of paper that would become famous under Henrik's name, Zygalski sheets. They were perforated sheets, 6 series for each possible rotor order, each sheet marked for a ring setting, with holes cut where females appeared, positions in the indicator permutation where both steckered letters were lit. You took message traffic, noted indicator pairs, put a sheet for one rotor order down, rotated another sheet over it, then another, aligned them according to the indicator positions, and if the Germans had been obliging enough that day, a single hole, one position, would let light through on all sheets. That hole corresponded to a daily key. It was paper computing at human scale. When Zygalski sheets worked, they worked with an elegance that would make a modern programmer blush. The Bureau Cifrov did not content itself with passivity. In 1938, Rejewski constructed a machine that listened for the day's secrets by chasing them on its own terms. He called it a bomba kryptologiczna. The bomba, for reasons that were either culinary or caustic, depending on who told the story later. Imagine 6 Enigma machines wired in clever ways, synchronized to step through positions faster than any hand could, looking for a condition only the correct wiring would satisfy. The bomba searched for the 6 rotor orders the Germans allowed themselves at that time. 6 machines for 6 orders. Mechanical speed married to mathematical pruning. It was automation in the service of a paper trick. A year later, history intervened with boots. Germany invaded. Poland, which had broken the cipher when most others doubted, packed up its tools. In July 1939, in a gesture as generous as it was desperate, the Blue Rochefort called the British and French to Piri, a forest outside Warsaw, and laid their work on a table. They gave away the methods, the machines, the confidence. Within months, the men who had done that work were scattered, to France, to North Africa, to Britain if they could get through, to lives that would be measured by the way they kept faith with what they knew. At Bletchley Park, the gift became a factory. British engineers built machine rooms with bombos taller than men. Alan Turing contributed a way to hunt that fit the new realities. Gordon Welchman added a diagonal board that turned an idea into a thing that made time surrender. Hut 6 took care of army and air traffic. Hut 8 went after the harder nut. Naval Enigma, with its own habits, better discipline, and a commander who could punish sloppiness with steel. There were dark weeks when nothing worked. There were bright hours when a machine clattered into a stop, and an operator who had slept in her chair smiled at a lampboard like a gambler watching cherries align. but it's easy to lose what you owe when the machines start to sing. The shape of the hunt remains Polish. Treat Enigma as permutations. Exploit the fact that the plug board, however brutish, cannot hide everything. Cultivate cribs, likely phrases you expect to see. Use cycles. Use habits against their owners. And when the work grows too big for paper alone, build machines that scale paper's logic, not replace it. So how did card tricks and cycles end up denying U-boats their surprise? The short answer is that radio betrays navies that confuse secrecy with procedure. U-boats live by signals. Patrol lines assigned. Contact reports sent. New orders dispatched from a commander whose pen name was BDU. Every time a U-boat sent a long report, it laid a trail. Every time an operator took a shortcut with his indicator or steckered letters in a way that felt clean, he left a fingerprint. Marion would have recognized in 1933. Every time German weather stations sent their daily forecast, they handed Hut 8 a crib, Wettervorhersage, or its variants, a word that can make or break a day. Every time a clerk used a girlfriend's initials as a message key, he gave a mathematician a gift wrapped in romance and stupidity. The British called these sillies, and while they belong to a later chapter, they live in the family of sloppiness that Rejewski's original routine turned into gold. Consider one night in 1941. A U-boat sends a report. Contact, bearing, distance, speed of convoy. The message is long because the commander wants credit, and long messages offer more chances for cribs. Analysts at a Y station write it down, take bearings, and send the text to Bletchley. Hut 8 checks its files. The day's naval key is not yet known, but they have tools. They have likely openings for messages, the formal salutations, and structure every officer writes by habit. They have a probable arithmetic of indicator positions. They have machine runs to test rotor orders. They have cross-correlation with meteorological broadcasts. And they have the one condition the Poles taught them to look for before any others: contradictions. If a trial setting produces a letter enciphered as itself anywhere, throw it away. Refuse what a machine cannot do. When the bombo stops and a setting passes all the absurdly simple symmetry tests first, the room breathes. Then it moves, because a stop is not an answer. It's a promise. With a candidate key in hand, you plug it into a replica naval Enigma, add the plug board found by Banburismus or diagonal mappings, and try the intercept. If the lamps light into words that smell like German, you are at work. If they light into sentences that mention a grid square you can plot on a wall map, you are dangerous. At Western Approaches Command in Liverpool, a young woman pins a string between a convoy at A and a U-boat at B. The string crosses a weather front. It crosses air coverage. It sentries a spot that will be very bad for freighters in 6 hours. The Admiral flips a cigarette between his fingers and says the ugliest soft word a sailor can say: divert. He draws a new line. Merchant captains mumble curses, change course, and live. Because a librarian in a country they'll never visit pulled a card from a drawer on the other side of the island and told a machine to think about a clerk's bad habit. If you're thirsty for concrete tools, here are a few that sat on those tables and trace to the original Polish insight. One is the cycle structure, already mentioned. Under the old German indicator procedure, cycle lengths gave you a non-plug board way to nail rotor orders and ring settings. The Germans eventually noticed that the double indicator was a well that had run dry and changed procedures. On May 1st, 1940, the indicator system for the Wehrmacht converted. Naval Enigma kept its differences, yet the mind that dissects cycles does not forget the trick. It adapts. Turing's work on Banburismus, a paper and cardboard technique named after cheap paper from Banbury, took pairs of messages and treated their possible alignments as statistical games, shaving time from searches by discarding rotor orders that could not fit. Welchman's diagonal board extended the logic that the plug board is not free. Letters connected in one place make diagonals in another. Both are ways to use the structure of permutations against their owners. Another is the crib. The Germans are tidy. Their messages often open with a predictable header, include formal phrases, and close with pro forma politeness. Hut 6 and 8 kept crates of guessed strings, Gerät, Spruchnummer, Annex, Heil Hitler, Wetter, and tested them like keys on a ring. The trick is to slide a crib along a ciphertext and check the implications. At each position, every letter pair you assert implies constraints on the plug board and rotor positions. If any letter would map to itself at that alignment, throw it out. If a contradiction arises at the diagonal board, throw it out. If nothing contradicts, let a bomber spend time. because time is the coin you want to spend last. A third tool is the fact that Enigma's reflector makes pairs. That simple property, no letter can map to itself, became a bludgeon. It eliminated millions of candidates without flipping a single switch. It also let human beings be part of the machine. A Wren's clipboard could carry those eliminations faster than a relay could click. All of this is romance when you read it later. It is frantic when you live it. The Germans did not sit still. In February 1942, naval Enigma gained a fourth rotor for U-boat traffic. The sea went dark, convoy losses surged, old tricks bent, some broke. While Hut 8 clawed back time with more bombers and better methods, a different kind of help arrived in the shape of courage and salt water. In May 1941, U-1110 was seized. In October 1942, U-559 was boarded by men who drowned after passing codebooks out of a conning tower. Those documents, married to machine logic, reopened a door that had shut. The point here is not to downgrade heroism, it is to defend chronology. Without the work the Poles had done, those codebooks would have been orphaned paper. With it, they were stones dropped in a cipher pond that made ripples all the way to Liverpool. Now, the mathematician at this story's heart. Who was he when he wasn't teaching the world to listen to a radio properly? Marian Rajowski grew up in Bydgoszcz, studied mathematics at Poznan, and looked like a man your grandmother would have trusted with her silver, while he did equations in the kitchen. He was quiet. He did not preen. He had the most unmilitary of virtues. When an idea worked, he let it work and move on. In the history of war, there are men who win medals by standing up. There are also men who withdraw the ground under the fight and never raise their voices. Rajowski belonged to the second tribe. In late 1932, when the Bureau asked him to see what could be done with the documents Paris had gifted, he did not shout about innovation. He wrote down what he knew. Permutations, chain them enough and you get cycles. Find a property that ignores the first chaos at the front, and you can see into the middle of the machine. The natural language for this work is group theory, not gunfire. It is unglamorous to say that a war was shortened by the difference between even and odd permutations. It is also true. He did something else engineers love. He built a device that matched his math. The cyclometer has been forgotten by people who love the flourishes of bomb stories. That is a mistake. The cyclometer was a declaration. Let the machine do the brute force part of the paper trick, so that the paper can keep up. Its output was only as good as the assumptions fed to it. Its assumptions were only as good as the repeat in German procedures. But while it held, it gave Poland a daily key in hours, not days. Intelligence without timeliness is trivia. The cyclometer's card catalogue turned trivia into routes around wolf packs, long before British women in uniform spun drum banks into greatness. When those women got their machines, they started the race miles down a road the Poles had paved. How did this hurt U-boats particularly? In three ways that matter more than any one run of luck. First, it wrecked the surprise that a wolf pack needed. When Brutjes signaled a group to pivot toward a convoy, those signals went out from a transmitter that did not know it had an audience. If Brutjes read a day's key, Western approaches would see the pivot hours before a wake turned. Convoys could thread the needle between packs. Escorts could be redistributed. Aircraft could be vectored. If you remove surprise, you do not have to be a better fighter. You have to be a fighter who shows up somewhere else. Second, it turned individual heroism into a system advantage. Without forewarning, a convoy might stumble into an ambush and rely on an escort captain's courage to survive. With forewarning, Admiralty could stack defenders where the odds needed stacking. Submarines are not faceless monsters. They are machines with limited endurance and humans who fatigue. Force them to sprint where you are not. Make them puff messages into the air about frustration, and they bleed effectiveness into the ether. Third, it made discipline matter in the right place. German signals officers were good. Their cryptographic design, while flawed in the reflector and injudicious in early procedures, was not a toy, but their network discipline had cracks. An operator in a harbour might reuse a key. A petty officer at sea might choose CIL for his trigraph, because it reminded him of a sweetheart. A clerk might send a weather report at the same minute every day with the same internal punctuation. Those were not things an admiral considered. Those were exactly the things a mathematician considered. Combined with a catalogued understanding of the machine's skeleton, human laziness sold out steel boats for the price of a few mistakes per shift. There is a temptation in this kind of story to fall in love with the machines and forget the rooms. Don't, A day at Bletchley depended on women who could set a bomb with speed and not drop a clip, men who could run a statistical tally without believing their own hopes, petty bureaucrats who made sure ink and paper never ran out, drivers who got ciphertext from a Y station to an analysis hut before lunch. It also depended on a culture willing to let a Polish idea win in a British building. That is rarer than you think. Institutions love credit. Credit is a corrosive. The wartime British government did imperfectly, but did this part right. It did not waste the head start it was given. At this point in the script, it's worth pressing a thumb against two myths. One, that Enigma fell only to British genius. Pride is not a sin if you remember the guest who brought the meal. Poland's gift of methods and machines in July 1939 is the quiet turning point. If you want a cinematic moment in a forest with men laying enigmas on a table, have it. Just don't forget the faces with Polish vowels when you cast the scene. 2. That Enigma's fall meant perfect clairvoyance. It did not. There were blackout periods when naval keys changed, when an extra rotor added a new dimension to the search, when a code book burned at sea and a clerk chose a less sloppy habit for a week. There were nights when code breakers cut paper into strips and studied them until the sun smeared and nothing gave. Intelligence is not a tap. It is a pump. It needs priming. If you don't understand that, you will blame the wrong men when a convoy dies. Now walk the ark back to the convoy in the cold. A destroyer throws a star shell. A night fills with white daylight. A U-boat commander squints. He will write that the convoy turned early. The shepherd of that convoy will write that he felt like a thief with a key to a house. Both men are right. A key was made, one letter at a time, years before, by a mathematician who realized that if you write down enough cycles, the future starts keeping appointments with you. The house style of this channel asks for numbers that say more than adjectives, so here are a few you can use to feel the shape of the thing. At full tilt, the British Bombay program ran hundreds of machines, each 7 feet tall, weighing a ton, able to test thousands of rotor settings per minute. Hut 8's attack on naval Enigma could consume most of that horsepower. When a day ran bad, a Wren's shift might turn 5 or 10 stops into something that could be handed to a naval analyst. A good day's read of U-boat traffic could move tens of ships and hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo out of harm's way. That is the scale. The seed, though, was a shoulder-wide room in Warsaw, where a man bent over a pad and realized that a doubled indicator made a cycle shape that ignored the plugboard. The house style also asks for people amid the arithmetic. Here they are. A Y station operator at Scarborough, in a hut where salt eats the screws, pulling German Morse out of a sea of static, and the occasional jazz station. A teleprinter clerk at Bletchley, using fingers that now, in old age, ache when it rains. A Polish analyst in France after 1939, still working behind the cloth at defeat because the math was bigger than any border. A captain in a merchantman who writes a letter home after a night of not dying and mentions, without knowing the word, ultra. And Rejewski himself, who survived the war, worked a not fancy job and did not spend his life preening about a piece of algebra that turned U-boats into less. There's one last part of the routine we should talk about, because it says something beyond the war. Cryptography is a conversation between design and sloppiness. An engineer can remove a class of weakness, a human being will invent another. Rejewski's method exploited the way Germans used Enigma, not only what Enigma was. When the Germans removed the doubled indicator, the method lost some bite. When the Germans added a rotor, the search got deeper. But when the Germans demanded absolute discipline, never reuse, never predict, never write like a human, their human operators quietly revolted and made sillies. The British and the Poles, and later the Americans, rode those little betrayals like a surfboard. The lesson does not expire. Nothing you build will be used by angels. The system includes the user. It also includes the statistician's long patience. Banburismus was not a break Enigma machine. It was a way to save time. To push rotor orders you didn't need to test into a bin marked "Not Today." The diagonal board was not secret sauce. It was a wiring that turned a complicated cross-implication into a thing an operator could see with her eyes. The Polish bomber was not omnipotence. It was speed pointed like a spear at a particular vulnerability. Every one of these is an example of a larger rule. Scalability comes from treating the structure of a problem honestly, and refusing to believe you can outmuscle what a pencil can outthink. U-boats lost surprise the way ice melts, edge by edge, drip by drip, until one day a commander stuck his head up and found the sea did not have the shape he had been briefed to expect. The war at sea didn't end because of it. Atlantic weather, aircraft range, radar, Huff-Duff, and more men in corvettes than you can count had their say. But every diverted convoy you never read about sits like a star the night hit from a periscope, because a Polish algebra lecturer didn't blink when the rest of Europe did. We'll close where the story began, with radio noise and a card file. It is midnight. Somewhere, a German petty officer types A and X between words, because his sergeant likes tidy messages. Somewhere else, a British petty officer writes those letters down and circles them, because she has been told this is a habit, and because someone, years ago, taught a room to love habits. In a drawer, a set of cycles printed on stiff card whisper that if today's necklace is 13742, then the middle of the machine must be set this way, not that way. A bombie turns, a light stops, a room moves, an admiral lifts a phone, a convoy changes course, a U-boat sees empty water where prey should be. That absence is history. You don't get to see it unless you learn to watch the spaces between signals the way Marion did. He taught War a grammar in which silence could be written down and read. Subscribe for more untold stories of World War II. The ones where a washer, a sheet of holes, or a cycle on a page made more difference than a general's speech. Secrets die when patterns live. And some nights, when patterns live on our side first, boats full of food and children's clothes get home.